In this video, we talk about why were people accused of witchcraft, punishments for the accused, the gender ratio of accusations, how did the accused prove their innocence, how widespread was the witch hunt, and the end of the Black Era. Witchcraft in the Middle Ages was relatively rare. During this time, accusations were uncommon, as the idea of widespread witchcraft had not fully emerged. It wasn't until the late medieval and early modern periods, particularly after the 14th century, that a rise in witch hunts and accusations was seen. The reasons varied for men and women but shared common themes. Reasons for women who were outspoken, independent, or defied societal norms were often targeted as witches. Those who challenged traditional gender roles or exhibited behavior seen as unruly were considered suspicious by the authorities and communities. Women with knowledge of herbs, healing practices, or midwifery were frequently accused of witchcraft. If a treatment failed or a child died during childbirth, they were often blamed. Widows or unmarried women who had property or wealth were prime targets for accusations. These women were often accused of witchcraft to strip them of their assets, as accusations could lead to their imprisonment or execution, leaving their property up for grabs. Women who did not adhere to the prevailing religious practices or followed folk traditions instead of mainstream beliefs were often branded as witches. Reasons for men. Men accused of witchcraft were often those who challenged authority, such as political dissenters or individuals who opposed the church's influence. Male healers, alchemists, or astrologers were also targeted if their practices were considered heretical or dangerous. In many cases, disasters like crop failures or plagues led communities to blame solitary or eccentric men, using them as scapegoats for misfortune. In Iceland, a significant number of accusations were directed at men, often linked to disputes over land or power. Those practicing traditional magic, known as Gulda, were particularly vulnerable to such accusations. Punishments for the accused. Punishments for those accused of witchcraft were exceptionally cruel, designed to instill fear and serve as public warnings. Burning at the stake was one of the most common methods, symbolizing purification through fire and making a grim example of the accused. In England, hanging was more prevalent, considered slightly less brutal but equally final. Torture was frequently used to extract confessions, with victims subjected to horrific devices like thumbscrews, the rack, or the Iron Maiden. Drowning tests were another grim ordeal where suspects were thrown into water. Floating marked them as guilty, while sinking and drowning ironically proved their innocence. Others faced life imprisonment in appalling conditions, enduring a slow and painful existence behind bars. The gender ratio of accusations. Women were the primary targets of witchcraft accusations, with historians estimating that 70 to 80% of those accused were female, highlighting the deep-rooted misogyny of the era. However, men were not entirely spared. In regions like Iceland, the ratio of male to female accusations was more balanced. These men were often accused of practicing folk magic or using spells for personal gain. How did the accused prove their innocence? Proving innocence during witch trials was nearly impossible, as the methods imposed on the accused were designed to confirm guilt. The infamous ordeal by water involved dunking the accused into a river. Floating was considered proof of guilt, while sinking often resulted in death. Torture was another common practice, forcing many to confess to crimes they hadn't committed just to end their suffering. Some accused individuals tried to call on community members to vouch for their character, but fear of reprisal often kept potential allies silent. Even minor mistakes while reciting prayers were seen as evidence of witchcraft. In rare cases, intervention by nobles or influential figures could sway a trial's outcome, their social standing sometimes enough to save the accused. Looking at these absurd methods of proving one's innocence, it's hard not to wonder, with such cruel and arbitrary tests, how many people today would stand a chance? Out of 100 people, how many could survive being tied up and thrown into the water? How widespread was the witch hunt? The witch trials were not confined to a single region but spread across Europe and the Americas, leaving a grim legacy. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, historians estimate that approximately 100,000 people were accused of witchcraft in Europe alone, with around 40,000 to 50,000 of them executed. The intensity of the trials varied by region, with countries like Germany, Switzerland, and Scotland experiencing some of the deadliest hunts in colonial America. The Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 became a notorious example of mass hysteria. Over 200 people were accused during this period, the end of an era. The witch hunts began to decline in the late 17th and early 18th centuries as scientific reasoning and Enlightenment ideas took hold. Legal reforms demanded stronger evidence, and superstitions gradually lost their grip on the judicial process. The last known European execution for witchcraft occurred in 1782, with Anna Goldie in Glarus, Switzerland, earning her the title the Last Witch of Europe. A year later, in 1783, the last official trial took place in Doruchów, Poland, though no executions followed. These events marked the administrative and symbolic end of the witch trial era. In America, the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 became the last large-scale witchcraft persecutions. Over 200 people were accused, and 30 were found guilty. Of these, 14 women and 5 men were executed by hanging. Giles Corey, another accused, died under torture after refusing to enter a plea. Even animals were not spared. 2 dogs were killed. 1 shot after a girl claimed it had bewitched her. The trials, fueled by religious fervor and personal grudges, ultimately sparked public repentance and growing skepticism, which helped shape the eventual decline of such beliefs. What part of this story shocked you the most? What would you do if you were accused of witchcraft? And if you lived back then, how would you prove your innocence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Discover more fascinating and historic tales on our channel.